in this presentation. All right, everyone. So today we are going to be having Jack Hamby from the Bureau of Land Management talking to us about the Bureau of Land Management and 30 by 30. Jack, would you like to introduce yourself to our group today?
Good morning. How am I sounding now? Am I good?
You sound great.
Oh, excellent. That's good. First of all, I want to apologize for not flashing my lovely picture up on the screen. My system this morning is currently band-aided together. As I told Josephina, this is a government operation and we're just running on band-aids and baling wire today. So I'm Jack Hamby, been with the agency almost 34 years. I am currently the state range invasive species and post-fire, et cetera, state lead in California. But I'm currently working in Carson City, Nevada right now because I have been trying to retire now for 4 years and it just hasn't worked. So we'll live with that. All right, so let me run through. I've got, I don't know, 20 odd slides here, the last handful of the questions that Melanie sent to me, and we'll go over those in depth. Let me kind of get through the presentation, and hopefully I can hear what everyone is saying. So let's get rolling here. Okay, looks like we're a little off on the top. All right, so what is 30 by 30? So it's an initiative that focuses on conserving lands and water across federal lands and state lands to a point over the next 30 years. So with concerns over climate, has resulted in considerable number of people that have been harmed. I mean, if you're in a hurricane zone or a tornado zone, watch the numbers. They're going to go up this year significantly. And some people are really concerned about their livelihood over the next 30 years. So it does not raise conservation above other uses, as you've seen in the news, but it does take conservation of lands and water to the same level as other uses. So let me keep rolling and we'll talk about those other uses. So bottom line is that 30 by 30 means that 30% of the lands in the US and water will be conserved by the year 2030. So definitions, this is key right now. So conservation means that we use a resource in a sustainable way. Now, this is what the BLM has been doing since 1976. But wait, the BLM was founded in 1945, but we've only been doing this since 1976. I'll talk about that more in a minute. Preservation means that those resources are off limits. You can go and take pictures, but no touchy. Okay, so this is more like what the National Park Service does. Yellowstone, Yosemite, those areas. So conservation reserves and conservation stewardship is what everybody's hearing about a lot more lately. It's just buzz terms. So the America the Beautiful initiative, this is what is considered to be a conservation initiative. This is what the current administration used to launch the federal 30 by 30 initiative. Okay, so what did California do? So the governor of California in 2020 signed Executive Order N82-20 in order to show how California is participating in the national 30 by 30 initiative. And this is a quote. These are two sets of documents I glued together to show what California is doing. And the big document that I read said, it is laid out to fight climate change, protect and restore biodiversity. Protect and restore biodiversity has been a buzz term for 30 years. Protect biodiversity means kind of to mitigate and build resilience to climate change. Now, I don't want to not support any of this, but every time any human tries to level out the playing field, they tend to get squashed. Anybody that says that they can, change the climate, you know what? There's only about one place that has climate that you can't change. Try the moon. So what we do in the Bureau is we try to even out the extremes. So expand access to nature for all Californians. Wonderful. I love it. I'm a nature lover. My children are nature lovers. We're out in it all the time. Check that box. So we're looking at protecting the biodiversity and fighting climate change, restoring biodiversity. So where are we right now in the 30 by 30 initiative? So California's coastal waters are about 16% conserved. This means California is halfway there. Only 500,000 acres to go. An acre is, 43,560 square feet. That's a lot of real estate we need to watch out for. And we need to get it put on this list. So I read on April 22nd of this year, state of California is going to open a new state park, number 281, the Dos Rios Park in the Central Valley. This will be put into this 500,000 acres because they're going to take this real estate, clean it up. It's got ponds on it. Hopefully they put fish in them or fish back in them. And they're going to do some more resilient planting, trees, shrubs, wildflowers, so that we can keep moving forward on 30 by 30. So currently, 14% of the US is protected from development. Now, that may not sound like a lot, but when you look at the 300 plus million acres in the United States, that's a lot of land. So down here it says, I found this on another document that said 60% of the US lands are in natural or wild state. And I thought that was a little odd until I found the PS at the bottom that said, this is counting Alaska. So even though Alaska is becoming more hospitable in living conditions, it's still pretty rough in the wintertime. And that's why Alaska is part of our initiative on the whole. So on federal lands, I read an article again on April 22nd that in the lower 48, the number of newly conserved lands is about 8%. So 30 minus 8 leaves us quite a bit more to go. So are we moving forward? Yes, we are. Well, how are we moving forward? By boosting existing programs. That's the first task. So what do I mean by existing programs? Well, the BLM has an awesome wilderness program. I mean, California has the largest amount of wilderness of all the lower 48 states. So we are light years ahead of the rest of the country. Believe me, I worked in California almost 20 years. We're light years ahead of the world. So partnerships work, and that's why California works so well. However, from a federal point of view, there's only $7.2 million going into partnerships in 2020. I am happy to say that's well over 15 million now, just money that the Bureau has for working in partnerships. So in summary, more money, more partnerships is needed if we're all going to commit to doing this. Okay, on May 3rd, a couple of weeks ago, I read an article that stated that the President of the United States added 13,696 acres to the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument. Everybody know where that is? That's in north central California. Awesome fishing, beautiful camping, great hiking. He took the 11-mile long ridge and added it to the national monument. It's the big ridge that runs north to south or south to north, however you drive, on the east side of the reservoir. It looks kind of barren and it burns off every 10 years, but it is absolutely gorgeous area. I even heard there's elk up there now. Okay, so I'm gonna roll that into, let's talk about the Bureau of Land Management. So currently the BLM manages about 245 million acres in the United States. That's counting Alaska. In California, we manage part of northwestern Nevada. So the California State Office is responsible for about 15 million acres and change. So we have quite a hunk of the US that we manage in our little corner of the world. So right now, the BLM in California, we manage less than half of those lands for livestock grazing. That's what I spend most of my time with. Well, in the wintertime, that's what I spend most of my time with. In the summertime, I work on the whole fire situation, which is, as you know, in California is it's a scary issue. It really is. Give you an example. My middle son is a firefighter with the U.S. Forest Service, and at about 8 o'clock on Saturday night, he was called out on a fire on the El Dorado National Forest. We had a big, huge family uh, meal planned for Sunday with his mother and his other two brothers, and he had to roll out on a fire in May. So for him, that was unusual. So he got back at midnight, got 3 hours sleep, and still showed up at this get together with his mother. He loves his mother. So this is the dedication that our people have. So keep rolling. So in 2012, US Congress passed a budget which they required the BLM to accept as mitigation those grazing allotments being donated back to the BLM by the permit or lease, whatever type of document it is, in the California Desert District only. Kind of a, let's call it an experiment. And it was named Public Law 112-74. Right now, I have received 6 permits, almost 1/3 acres that, you know what? There's not going to be livestock on there anymore at all, ever. So 3 years ago, give or take, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the BLM finally closed on what we call the Onyx Ranch proposal. 215,000, mostly public acres. It's kind of north and west of Ridgecrest. And BLM received the grazing permit back with a very nice letter as a donation, as a mitigation donation, which means no more grazing. The ironic thing is that permit was being held by a wind company, which is a little iffy, but they had leased the base property out to a local rancher who was ranching on it. And he knew that it was going away eventually. So took us 3 years to get that one done. This is an awesome area. It's the best area in Ridgecrest. I don't care what anybody says. I was the manager down there for a while. It's that whole slope hill just northwest of town. Lots of springs, lots of wildlife all over the area, and it goes almost to Lake Isabella. So now comes the hard part. So we're going to recover the area from past uses. I mean, there's a power line that goes through up there right now. We're not going to remove that. That's an impossibility. But we can remove most of the livestock control structures like fences, cattle guards, internal to the area. We don't want to start pulling down stuff from external because that would allow livestock from the neighboring allotments to wander on down. And we're going to talk about putting some roads to bed. There's a couple areas in there that look like racetracks. We're going to put those to bed. Okay, so I received a handful of questions from Melanie. I know I'm just throwing this out in a gross format, but like I said, I've worked for this agency 34 years. I was actually born into this agency because my father worked for the agency for many, many, many years. So I know I'm shotgunning it out. Bear with me, and you can call me back later if you want. Okay, so Emily asked, how can we provide land back to the California Native tribal nations within 30 by 30? Now, for the record, I am not a cultural specialist. So let's leave it at that. I'm not 100% sure there's a mechanism on the 30 by 30 initiative where the federal government can just provide land back to the tribes. I do know there are other methods to provide the Native Americans land in different laws. However, I'm not versed in these laws and I don't really want to go out on a limb to talk about it. But when I was the acting manager in the Southern District of California, I worked on a land exchange with the Agua Caliente in Palm Springs. They made the proposal, and we the Bureau took I forgot 7, 8 sections of BLM land and provided it to the Agua Caliente, and they provided us bits and pieces of other Native American lands in around the mountains above Palm Springs. And it was good for both because they were able to strengthen their, hate calling them reservations, that's just so rude, but it would help strengthen the area that they live and manage. And it helped the Bureau strengthen the areas that we manage for the public. So wonderful. I think it was 2 years ago it finally got through. We'd worked on it for almost a decade. So I did look at the 30 by 30 initiative pretty closely. And yes, there's a lot of discussion in there about tribal consultation. Several pathways for increased participation is being talked about. I'm sorry, that's all I know. You might want to dive into that yourself and see what you can find. So sorry, Emily, that's the best I can do. But there are other laws that allow for, what do you want to call it, repatriation of lands to the tribal Americans. And if you're really into it, have you been watching the 4 dams they're going to remove up on the Upper Klamath? 2 of the dams are out and they started removing the third one this weekend. And that's in very much in consultation with the tribes. There's BLM land involved in that, but we're a minor player, so to speak. So we're letting everybody else run that show, and we're just cleaning up the mess as it goes away. All right, Annan, is that how you pronounce your name, Annan? So what permits are allowed on BLM lands? Well, trust me, there's a bunch of them. We have permits for just about everything out there. Examples are, but not limited to, livestock grazing, lands and realty. If you want a right of way across BLM land, you've got to get a permit. Timber harvest, outdoor recreation events. When I was a leader in the Boy Scouts, we used to go down outside of El Centro and go to the rocket shoot out there on the lake bed. And the people who put on the rocket shoot had to have a permit from BLM because it was BLM land. Mining, sand and gravel, renewable energy permits, movies and commercial filming all require permits. When I was working in Ridgecrest, I signed off on some commercials being filmed down there. I don't know if you guys remember, 10 odd years ago, 12 odd years ago now, for the Super Bowl, they had the Dodge truck come zipping across in front of some pinnacles with some wild horses in the background. That was all filmed on BLM land. That was at the Pinnacles just outside of Ridgecrest. They had to have a permit to do that. But there's also tons and tons and tons and tons of other things you can do on public lands, which do not require permits. You can go camping, stargazing, hunting, fishing, pleasure driving, exploring, rock hounding, picnicking, any of those things you're more than welcome to do on most public lands. Access has become an issue, but we're working on that. Question 3, how do areas that are grazed have those privileges granted and then later revoked or removed? Well, let me say, first of all, they're not privileges. They're an authorization that the BLM does. So most of this question is covered under 43 CFR Part 4100, Code of Federal Regulations. That's the CFR part. So to receive a grazing permit, we call it, it's kind of like a first in line. So, but many of these families that have been grazing out there have been grazing out there since before the BLM was established. So it's been a long time they've been out there. However, about 20% of the permits in California change over every 2 to 5 years. It is not easy grazing on public lands. And it's, we have this 43 CFR has a whole section in there on what you cannot do on public lands. So you can also pick up a permit or lease. You can purchase it from someone that has it. That's totally legal. You can buy their base property with a permit or lease attached to it, and then the BLM will transfer it over to you, providing you're in the livestock business and providing you're a citizen of the United States and providing you're in what we call good standing. You're not on America's Most Wanted, you're not, shooting people in your backyard, any of that stuff. That would preclude you from being a permittee. Or if you're in constant trespass on the Forest Service, we're not going to accept you as a permittee. Okay, so to have a permit removed from you generally happens when the land is being what's called devoted to another purpose. The solar projects that are going on in Southern California right now, um, I watched a lot of money going back and forth between one solar developer and a permittee, and the solar person basically bought out their permit and then donated their permit back to the BLM, which is fine and legal under Public Law 112-74. Um, BLM's part in that whole negotiate, we're not allowed to look at the money part of it. We see it, but we're not allowed to look at it. So BLM will send the permittee or lessee a 2-year notice telling them that, look, this permit is being basically dissolved. You have 2 years to vacate the property. And that's it. I mean, they can, scream and holler, but the judge will generally rule in our favor because it's in our regulations. So, all right, another way to have your permit or lease removed from you is if like you go out and kill a bald eagle. That's a big no-no, or a golden eagle. If you're out poaching or any of that stuff, we can remove your permit for those discrepancies. Illegally dumping toxic chemicals on public land, that's a no-win. You're going to lose your permit for that. After a court battle, the permittee lessee generally will lose the permit or lease. Also, part of what I have been doing since I started with this agency is continued use of the land outside of the existing season of use. Basically, if you trespass 100% of the time. Now, there was a permittee in Northern California and Nevada and Montana and Utah who he didn't care. He kept trespassing and trespassing and trespassing, and which is kind of stupid because he had a whole lot of BLM permits. And by the time the court cases were done, he had lost about 30,000 animal unit months. And in California, we did not reissue those. Those were gone, and we still hold those to this day, partly because the land's still trying to recover. But I've been out on some of those lands, and I've seen Sarcobatus vermiculatus, big greasewood that is as big around as my thumb, or his cows were chewing it off. That's how bad he was trespassing. He is no longer a permittee, and God rest his soul. I hope he's doing time in purgatory right now. All right. So, all right. How can the BLM improve the communications and collaborations with tribal nations? Literally, we have 3 people on the staff in Sacramento that do nothing but talk with tribes or the SHPO office. They are busy. Literally, California has more tribes, federally recognized tribes, than any other state in the country. So we're sending out tribes and rancherias. We're sending out almost 300 pieces of mail informing them of what we're doing every year. And we consult with them on all the big things that we do. Like I said, the 4 dams are moving off the Klamath. We've been consulting with them for a long time on that. Putting salmon back in the Consumnes watershed. I think it's Consumnes. Yeah, we've been consulting with the tribes on that. So now there's a fine line that says these tribes are a separate government. And Jack, I am not allowed to discuss anything, enter into any negotiations with them at all. Only the managers can talk with tribes. It's called government to government negotiations is what it is. So there's some sticky stuff that's in the law. I basically do what my boss tells me to do when it comes to tribes. If the tribe says, I'll give you an example. In Nevada, we had a fire that burned through an area. Basically, it burned it to the bare ground. So I went in with what I thought was a really good seed mix. The cultural specialist on my staff went and talked to the tribes about it, and they were good with, I think, 4 of the seed mix, 4 individual species in the seed mix, but there were 2 they didn't want, and there were 2 more they wanted to substitute, which was, for me, that was a hot damn moment. I love it. They're finally engaging me on the fire rehab. And so we went in there and I dumped those 2 They were basically non-native seed anyway. Dumped those two out and picked out Oryzopsis hymeneoides. It's got a new name for it now, but it's called Indian rice grass. They wanted more Indian rice grass. You bet. I doubled that seed mixture. And they wanted Arosia lanata. It's got a new Russian name on it. It's white sage, winter fat, whatever you want to call it. And we went in and we had to come up with a creative method because this stuff is like seeding cotton balls. I mean, it is just horrible. So we made a blower and blew it out in front of the drill seeding that we were doing. And it worked very well. All right, Melanie, are there funds to end grazing privileges? Again, they're not privileges. Don't say that. You didn't do nothing but irritate me. All right, there are no federal funds lying around to end grazing privileges at all. Matter of fact, every time somebody asks the federal government, they get yelled at pretty hard. Now, in the California Desert District, as I said earlier, there are mitigation policies which allow corporations or individual organizations that can purchase a grazing permit or lease from a willing person and donate them back to the federal government. Public Law 112-74. The government must accept this donation and permanently devote the forage to another purpose. This means no more livestock grazing. So to me, the bottom paragraph addresses what the top part of the sentence, the question was about. So the answer is unequivocally no, comma, but there are ways to do it. You just have to find the ways to do it, or call me and I'll tell you. All right. Number 6, what type of access and recreational opportunities on public lands? You know what? You can do just about anything you like out there except like start the area on fire. You can go camping, hunting, fishing, jogging, motorbiking, take your dog for a walk. Just remember, in some areas, you got to have your dog on a leash. Sightseeing, stargazing. Heck, you can even run naked through the desert if you want, as long as you don't do that in a designated recreation site. Okay? Run naked through the desert, not in a recreation site. You'll insult the other pets. But access is another issue. The Motherlode Field Office just south of Sacramento, they have 192, 96 parcels down there. And yet there's 30 parcels that the BLM does not have direct drive-in access to. I know it's kind of sad and pathetic, but that's the way it is. Because first of all, there's no grazing permit. If we had a grazing permit on there, by you signing the grazing permit, we have access to that land. We have to tell you that we're driving there, but we have access to that land. If we don't have a grazing permit, that land is locked up, and it can be locked up behind lots of gates, and we'll never get in unless we go in with a helicopter. So, there's some issues out there. We the Bureau are in the the process of buying access. But that's gotten sticky over the last 20 years. We bought a huge access to Eagle Lake, and the guy locked the gate on us. Said, hey, we just gave you $1 million for access. Oh, no, you didn't. Yes, we did. We took him to court. The judge says, hey, they gave you $1 million. They can access it. And the guy says, yeah, but it's only on foot. And the judge says, yep, you're right, only on foot. So you've got to park a mile away and hike down. We have access. It's just not pretty. All right. Melanie asked, does BLM have a 30 by 30 approach as guided by? Yes. We're following what's been handed to us in the federal 30 by 30 approach. We're in California, we are doing everything we can to do what they've laid out for us. And it's the same thing. Climate change, public access, and biodiversity. I am literally doing that on a daily basis. And I'll give you an example. Every year, I've been sitting here in this job for 13 years, about, give or take. Every year, the amount of land being grazed in California goes down. Every year, the amount of animal unit months that are being sold by the federal government on public lands, BLM lands in California, goes down. That's how we're contributing. That's how I'm contributing. All right. Unfortunately, I am not on the 30 by 30 team. I've got like 7 other jobs I need to do. So I don't have it all memorized, but we've been tasked with moving forward with conservation on BLM lands in California. And we are so far ahead of all the other states that they're jealous. I work with them on some of these projects, and they're just jealous of what we've done. An example is Onyx lands, 215,000 acres. No other state has done that. All right. Where are why are the BLM lands checkerboarded? This is an awesome question. I've studied this for years. So the first part is early in the history of the US government, the government had no money. They were broke. So they encouraged the railroads to build and expand across the country, Transcontinental Railroad. So they granted the railroad companies every other section for 10 miles on either side of the railroad right of way, so that the railroad companies could sell off these lands to pay for the railroad. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And they were given, basically, they were given title to those lands. So that means that the BLM still held on to every other section. Now, if you follow these big square blocks, 640-acre blocks across the US, they follow the railroads. So they built the railroads, and that's why we have so many railroads going across the country. And now it's up to the BLM to manage what we have as leftovers. It is not an easy job at all. That's the first part of it. Second part of it is mining law of 1872, which provides mining claims could be filed on federal lands. These are not boxes. They're like, we used to call them squiggly snakes, because they follow the ore resources under the ground. And for many, many, many years, once you filed a claim, they gave it to you fee simple, which means you had private ownership. Some of the, I was involved in a battle many, many years ago in Colorado when I worked in Washington, D.C., because this little squiggly area was now a world-class ski resort. So how do we manage around a ski resort that looks like a snake on public lands? A disaster. We worked through it, but it was rough. Okay. And up until 1976, when the Federal Land Policy and Management Act was passed, the BLM was tasked with disposing of the public lands. I mean, they were giving away public lands up until 1976. And then somebody had the brilliant idea that maybe we ought to start preserving some of these lands. Maybe we should hang on to them for, the public. So we are still trying to clean up those issues. I'm still working with Redding, because Redding had like 300 little tiny 40 and 120 acre parcels that just had nothing on them. They were like old gravel pits or rocky ridges. And we've been exchanging those for better parcels. The screenshot at the very first of this presentation was taken by a friend of mine up on the Sacramento Bend. And we now manage most of that area. So yeah, we're doing a great job at trying to clean them up. All right. Okay, so this is the best question of all. I know nothing about BLM land. Start from beginning. Well, in the beginning, there was the heaven and the earth and the seas, and oh wait, that's too far back, right? So in the beginning with BLM, we started out as the General Land Office in 1812, and they were overwhelmed by, basically the Civil War. And they were trying to get rid of parcels, and they were literally giving federal land to former soldiers, which was interesting. Then came the mining law of 1872, the Ditch and Canal Act of 1870, 1869, a whole lot of other laws that were, again, designed to give away the land. Then came the Taylor Grazing Act, because right there at the turn of the century, I think it was estimated 1 million, 2 million, 3 million livestock died because of the heavy winters during the turn of the century. And they were overstocked. The range was overstocked. So the Taylor Grazing Act came about in 1934. And from 1934 to 1945, it was a knockdown, drag out battle on who actually was able to graze on public lands. And my dad used to say between 1945 and 1968, the BLM basically removed almost 60% of all livestock from public lands because it was just everybody was throwing them out there. So that was the first basically orderly assemblage of the BLM lands. What we had, we didn't even know we had. And then, these lands at the time were called leftover lands. So in 1968, you had the Wilderness Act, you had National Environmental Policy Act, and then the Wild and Free Roaming Horse and Burro Act of 1971, FLIPMA 1976, and then it all came to a halt. And that's when the BLM was tasked with managing for conservation. Public Rangeland Improvement Act in 1978, that's where we get the grazing fees, the $1.35 grazing fees, which, I don't think anybody really agrees with, but I mean, I have livestock in my yard. Yes, I have 4 turkeys in my yard, and they're just beautiful animals. And I've got them penned up, and I spend about $30 per week feeding these critters. So that's about $120 a month versus the $1.35 to graze on public lands. And yes, I build my own fences. All right. So in the meantime, 43 Code of Federal Regulations, Section 4100 for livestock grazing has been updated several dozen times. I've worked on the last 4 updates of this thing. And the most recent one we have is 2005. And it's the one that basically lays out how we're to do business. And we have numerous databases, the Rangeland Improvement Project System, the Rangeland RAS. I can't even remember what that one is anymore. I live in an agency that lives and breathes acronyms. But anyway, that's just a gross highlight. Trust me, it's just gross. But there's a great book called Opportunity and Challenge. It's all about the early BLM. Now, BLM wrote the book, I know. And I, for years, was working on the sequel to that. So, and it's still not out. I mean, I literally spent 15 years working on a sequel. So it's not out yet. But that's a good book. If you're really interested, it's a good way to start learning about the Bureau. And I can go on forever. Like I said, I've got almost 34 years with this agency. I still don't understand some of the crazy things we do, but I do my job, and I do my job to the best of my ability. All right, so I'm going to open it up. I don't know how much time you had scheduled for this, but I'm going to open it up. Feel free to ask any question. I don't care how, ruthless it is. I cannot see. I know that Laura's got her hand raised, but I cannot read it. So go ahead, Laura, ask.
Oh, no, great. This was really interesting. Thanks. I had a question on grazing permits. Can they be administratively retired, like to protect a sensitive resource, rare plants? I know there's some BLM allotments on the Berryessa Moloch Oyak Ridge expansion and that new national monument. Can BLM just say, hey, we're going to administratively close this to protect sensitive resources, help 30 by 30? And then I know it wouldn't be permanent, but is that something that can be done?
Sacrilege. We could never do something like that. However, in the California Desert District right now, we've reduced grazing by 60% down there, courtesy of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, because there are so many threatened and endangered species down there, and it's some pretty rough country to be grazing livestock. In another presentation, I show some pictures of jackrabbits running around, and I said those were John Casey cows. But because of the desert tortoise, Mojave ground squirrel, blunt-nosed leopard lizard, there's a couple more. I can't. There's a couple of bugs. Oh, the Kino checker spotted butterfly, my favorite. Yes, we can administratively reduce them, but it took us 20 years and almost $1 billion to reduce those livestock grazing in the desert district. And that was, again, courtesy of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So the answer is no, we cannot do it. Yes, we have done it. We have a whole instruction memorandum on how to do it. But if the permittee is not willing, it'll be a knockdown, drag out fight. And it'll cost a lot of money. I mean, you're going to laugh. I managed the whole range program in the state of California on $5.9 million. That's all. And after working in Washington for 6 years, I can tell you that $5.9 million, that's a rounding error for Washington. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Yep. Okay. Somebody else?
Hi,
You're on
Jack.
mute. Oh.
I hate to butt in here, but we are at time and I do need to proceed with the
Oh.
rest